Okay, so we're back. We have our piece of copper wire stripped up. We're going to run it through our hands a few times to get it fairly straightened out. Again, this is a handy time for your gloves. And we'll get it pretty straight. We'll do some more straightening of that as we go along. Okay, so again, we go back to our antenna calculator, and it tells us that our balancing section, or tuning section rather, should be 19 point, if I look at my notes, 75 inches. So we're going to go right here to 19.75, make a mark. Now this is where we want to be pretty careful with our bend. We can find our mark again. We want to make it nice and sharp and square. That's going to be important for our frequency. Then we need to be about, the calculator said 0.5 something, close enough, 5/8 of an inch. We want to make a nice little kink there. Now that length is achieved for the 2 meter section, but this section here is more for the 70 centimeter. For the 2 meter it can be wider, but it won't affect the 2 meter being narrower. However, if we went wider, it could affect the 2 meter. Ed Fong had a discussion about that frankly went way over my head. So we're back to our mark here that was at 59.5 inches from before. We're going to wrap that around there. Just because it's a good way to mount it. Losing our dimension there. Or maybe it's because of my dimension. And that's plenty long enough, so we'll cut that off. Making sure we use the biggest pliers available to us to cut the little 16 gauge wire with. Give that a nice good squeeze. Now eventually, as a note, we'll be soldering this and probably our traps up the top. However, I have a potential availability of somebody's antenna tuner, so I'm going to use that to make some small adjustments. So for now, we're just using the friction of the crimping to hold it in place. Now, okay, so we've zoomed in here so you can see what we've done. We've gone ahead and wrapped it around here, got a little bit of tension that'll give us a nice connection until we're able to ground it. Now, we want to be able to keep this piece of the radiator from shorting out against the other side. So how are we going to do that? Well, a method I discovered when building a double biquad a while back is this fine here plastic straw makes it so that we can have the insulator piece we need. So we're going to cut these about 1/2 inch long because that's how long we need it to be. So instead of about, let's go ahead and take our tape measure. And I know you can't see this, but I'm going to make some marks on our straw with the marker in 1/2 inch increments. I'm sure you don't need a video to see how that's happening. So we're going to take it and cut some of these fellas here as they go flying off the table. All right.
Good.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and solder it because we discovered things were moving around quite a bit. So here we have stolen the wife's cutting board. I would say don't let her find out, but she is taping this for us lovingly. So we're going to go ahead and heat up the copper. That's going to take some doing because everything's pretty solid. And of course we're using a relatively small soldering iron. Now we want to put the heat into the copper, not into the steel shaft, because we don't want to heat it up too much and risk losing some of the springiness. We're using flux core solder to try to help to clean things up as we go along. And yes, this is about as exciting for you watching as watching paint dry. Okay, there we go. That should hold it at least while we keep working. Yeah, much better. Get that out of the way. Pause. Okay, now we're going to add our spacers. So we have our 1/2-inch cuts of our drinking straw and some 4-inch zip ties. So what we want to do here is run the straw through the zip tie through the straw. Straw is going to become our spacer. That one's cut a little bit long. And we're going to go around the copper, back through the straw. This helps if you have little tiny fingers, which I do not have. Put that about 4 inches. Go down. Put another one. And according to the calculators, this spacing is not critical. It just needs to be there. We do want to keep it pretty even, because the goal in the end of all this is we're going to encase it in some black heat shrink. Again, that'll make it look like it's just a regular loud truck going by. It should just look like a regular center loaded antenna when we're done. All right, try to add 2 more here. And this may sound crazy, but this method works. I originally used it when I built a double biquad for a cellular card, back when you actually still had cellular cards in laptops that went to a PCMCIA port. These are all electrically non-conductive and they don't affect the radiation pattern, so that's why these materials work really good for this. And we'll move those around a little bit. Take our wire strippers, tidy that all up, and tidy the other ones up that you can't see right now. Okay, then our next step is we're going to come back down here. We're going to measure up, according to our calculator, 1.9 inches from this point right here. And this is where we're going to attach our coax. That should be approximately our 50 ohm feed point. So we have here a length of coax. I prefer using the Mini 8, or some call it RG8X. We have that here. So we're going to go ahead and strip it up. We want to make sure that the braid goes on the balancing section and the center core goes here. Every now and then you may have seen where somebody was making a larger J-pole. Everybody loved the plumber's pipe, and they'll solder on a my brain's not working, 259 connector, or PL259 rather, and every now and then you'll see them put the shield side on here and the hot side over here because it looks pretty, but that doesn't do anything for our radiation patterns. Polarity wise, it needs to be the other way around. So we strip off our outer shield here, Give that just a little bit of a twist on the braid. Again, remember that gets soldered to there. And we're going to need to make that long enough to wrap around there. Pause. Okay, so we've stripped up our coax. We've made this considerably longer because one of the things that we've discovered is it appears that the solder and the stainless are not going to go together. Probably because our soldering iron is not getting hot enough, but that's okay because if we got it any hotter, we would risk losing the temper of the stainless antenna. The whip would lose its spring temper, and we don't want that to happen. So we're going to take our coax. The reason I'm wrapping it from here is because it'll lay smoother. There's our line once again. So we're going to wrap our braid around here. This will get soldered and that'll help clean it up some. Make sure, as you can see, we left a little bit of the white there. Let's get that twisted up a little bit nicer for everybody. We do not want the two to short. Otherwise we'll turn our feed line into the radiator, and that's just not going to do good things for our signal. So we get that wrapped on there. Then we're going to wrap the primary core around here. I think once we're positive of our tuning and everything is good, since the solder is probably not going to work or ever stick, we'll come back and we'll try some epoxy, maybe a little JB weld, something along those lines. So that should be roughly our 50 ohm feed point. And now we'll solder that up a little bit. Alright, so we've got our nice insulator underneath here. Heat everything back up and get it soldered. And we'll just clean up those little hairs. We're going to apply a little bit here so it doesn't unravel. Okay, we're going to flip this over here briefly, see how it looks. Okay, we need to clean up and add a little bit more solder here. Okay, that should take care of our soldering there. Knock down our sharp edges a little bit. All right, to keep this from moving around, we'll reconfirm that it's still on the little blue line that we made, which we've split there. And we're going to go ahead and take another one of our small zip ties. Attach this here. This will also help act as a strain relief. And again, if you're worried about how this is going to look, this part here is also going to get covered up later on when we add our heat shrink. So the heat shrink will come down here and go all the way out the end past the tip. You know what? Just because I like things to be extra secure, I'm sure this is going to get beat up, we're going to add another zip tie. Because if one's good, two must be better, right? Absolutely. I'll go ahead and pause. Okay, so to clarify, because we can't exactly get a direct across from each other between the braid and the center conductor, we see there's the line. The center conductor is a hair above it, the braid's a hair below it. We would have been perfect if it was exactly across, but because we couldn't get that way, I split the difference, which theoretically should keep us with the same ohm match down here. So we have our coax zip tied nicely to the shaft. We have everything in place where it needs to be. Our spacer's in. We're going to see how this works out frequency-wise. We're going to test it a little bit. And then the last thing will be the heat shrink. Now, as a brief mention, you want to make sure the heat shrink is over it, but not heated down and before you test it. Why? Because the heat shrink is not completely transparent to the RF frequencies that we're working at. So it may adjust the frequency just a little bit. So slide it over it, get everything adjusted, and once you're done, we'll come back, we'll heat shrink it up, and we'll take a look at our finished product.